Welcome back to Doge Watch, where we discuss all things Doge, let you know what Doge has been doing for the last week, and equip you with the arguments that you're going to need to combat as the bureaucracy inevitably strikes back. And they are certainly attempting to strike back, because I got to tell you right now, sitting on the floor of the Virginia House of Delegates, I am seeing more and more, let's call it frustration from some of our friends on the other side of the aisle with respect to Elon Musk, even though Elon Musk isn't doing much in Virginia right now. But nevertheless, I walk out of my office building today, and what do I see? A bunch of protesters with a bunch of, let's just say, signs conveying their frustration with the fact that we now have an agency dedicated to looking at all of the ways the government has been wasting your money. But like I said, the bureaucracy is not going to take it lying down, and they certainly demonstrated that today. In fact, let's look at what some of them had to say. We see that Doge data release, this comes from ABC News, Doge data release criticized by the intelligence community. Trump admin says it's public data. So what was the big thing that the intelligence community, that community that we've grown to trust so much over the last couple of years, had a problem with? Well, it had to do with the Doge website updating earlier this week to include information about the federal workforce across agencies. And in that, it contained details about the headcount and budget for the National Reconnaissance Office, an intelligence agency responsible for designing and maintaining U.S. intelligence satellites, according to a review by ABC News. And it goes on to explain that certain people, for instance, a former CIA officer who served on classification review boards, called the incident a significant breach, particularly if it involves the budget and personnel of the NRO, adding that it could be even more significant if it involves declassifying sensitive information under executive authority. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. Obviously, there are aspects of our government, of our intelligence community, of the Department of Defense, and we have classification reasons for a reason that we don't want going out on Twitter, right? That we don't want going out on X. And so when somebody makes a claim like this, I'm going to look at what they're actually talking about and try to determine whether or not they have a legitimate case. Now, I would say right now, the administration is already coming out and saying that this is public information. And when it does come to top-level budget items or top-level personnel for an organization like the NRO, I'm willing to bet that you actually could comb through public data and be able to get a pretty good read on what that actually entails. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think Doge should be careful about some of the things it puts out publicly, but I will say this. It is going to be interesting to watch as the same intelligence community, and again, let's not paint the entire community with that blanket. I know people that serve in the intel community that are wonderful patriots and just trying to do a very, very difficult job, oftentimes in very dangerous circumstances. But a lot of the people that are actually talking to the news, these people represent the same sort of types that, repeatedly told us that the Biden laptop was a Russian hoax. Right? And we were all just supposed to believe it. And so here's what I would tell to senior members of the intelligence community. If you want to be taken seriously, you can't have acquired such a long track record in a relatively short period of time, demonstrating to us that a lot of the things that you put out there as intel experts are actually politically motivated data. So if you want us to stop trusting what Doge is doing, especially as Doge eventually gets into analyzing the intel community and the Defense Department, right? Then you need to reestablish trust with us. Because quite frankly, right now, I say this as a former member of special operations, as a combat veteran, I can't wait for Doge to get to the DOD because you guys can't pass a single audit. And so while I do believe that Doge needs to be careful about any sort of sensitive classified information that could go out as a result of its doing its deep dive analysis, I still want that deep dive analysis to occur. And quite frankly, I don't trust anonymous members of the intel community coming out and telling me that there's been some sort of significant data breach. That's just where I'm at right now on this. Let's look at the next one here. This comes from Elizabeth Warren, none other than Elizabeth Warren. Keep in mind, this is the same person that was perfectly fine with 80,000 new IRS agents going over your Venmo transactions to make sure you didn't spend more than $600, right? She was perfectly fine with those unelected bureaucrats diving into how you were spending your money, but she's absolutely furious with unelected bureaucrats diving into how she's spending our money. So again, doesn't have a great deal of credibility with me. Elizabeth Warren says, big news, we're holding Doge accountable. It's not efficient to allow Elon Musk's operatives to mess with the systems that send Social Security checks or pay for your mom's doctor through Medicare. It's dangerous for the economy and a breach of privacy for millions of Americans. This was all based off of an Associated Press headline that said, breaking, the Treasury's Inspector General launches audit of U.S. government payment system security after Elon Musk Doge team gained access. This is going to be one of the things that you see repeatedly coming from the left. Is they're furious that Elon Musk and their team, whose responsibility is to analyze government agencies and government spending in order to make sure that it's actually being done in accordance with the U.S. Constitution, with federal law, and in accordance with what we, the American people, have been told our tax dollars are going to. The more access they get to it and the more they expose what's actually going on, the more the left is going to come and say, oh, the biggest problem here is them getting access to the data that they need in order to do the analysis. So again, when somebody's exposing fraud, the person that is jumping up and down the loudest telling you to stop, they're probably the ones that have been somewhat complicit in the fraud. And let's face it, Elizabeth Warren does not have the best track record for being honest about everything from what the government's spending money on to her own background, as she is the head pretendian in the United States Senate. All right, let's look at this next one. This one comes from Chuck Schumer, and I always love it. I love it when the left points something like this out. Chuck Schumer said, an unelected shadow government is conducting a hostile takeover of the federal government. I think what he means is an unelected shadow agency is conducting a hostile, not takeover, but exposure of the unelected shadow government known as the giant bureaucratic state that Chuck Schumer has been a big fan of, instigator of, and beneficiary of. That's why he's really mad. He says Doge is not a real government agency. Don't care. Doge has no authority to make spending decisions. Well, then why are you upset when spending decisions are made by the proper authorities based off of the information that Doge is providing them? Doge has no authority to shut programs down or to ignore federal law. Yeah, but you know who does have the ability to shut federal programs down? Elected officials that have been given the authority to do so and can use the information that Doge is gathering in order to justify why they're doing so. Doge's conduct cannot be allowed to stand. Congress must take action to restore the rule of law. Chuck, when have you been interested in the rule of law? You want to start taking a look at the rule of law, Chuck? Do me a big solid. Go over to Article 1, Section 8 of the United States Constitution. Look at the enumerated powers of the federal government, and then ask yourself why you keep doing all of these other things which don't fall anywhere within those categories. I'm not going to be lectured to, and I think most of the American people are not going to be lectured to by a senator that seemed perfectly fine to send millions of dollars to a military junta in Burma for DEI scholarships, thousands of dollars to Colombia for a trans opera, right? Millions of dollars for condoms in foreign countries. But now you're upset that Doge is actually going through and exposing how our tax dollars were actually being spent versus how you told us they were being spent. We actually had this debate on the floor of the House of Delegates just a couple of days ago. We had a member get up and say, oh my gosh, Doge is resulting in massive cuts from the NIH, the National Institute of Health. This organization helps people with cancer treatments, and it helps people with preventable diseases, and there's money for research that is being cut by Doge. And then all of a sudden, Delegate Joe McNamara got up and said, really, that's what you think's being cut? Actually, what's taking place right now is the NIH is no longer allowing institutions, many of them institutions of higher education, to be able to spend up to 60% of the money allocated for research on overhead and administrative costs. Yeah, that's right. See, they will tell you that what was being cut was money that had been earmarked for important research, when in reality, what these industries and these institutions of higher education were being told is, you no longer get to fleece the taxpayers by charging exorbitant amounts for administrative costs in order to conduct this research. The vast majority of the funds needs to go to the purpose of the research, not the administrative costs, which we all know at this point has been exposed as handing out additional jobs, additional contracts, additional grants to their buddies with worthless degrees that can't get a job anywhere else. But again, the marketing that the left spun on this was because it's National Institutes of Health, clearly what they're cutting is important dollars allocated for research. The reality was it was overhead and administrative costs, that they were trying to get more in line with industry standards. But this is always the problem when the government is spending your money. They don't care about efficiency. What they care about is being able to tell their constituents, look at all this money we allocated for important medical research. Well, I'll tell you this much. We'd probably be getting a lot better results out of all that funding for medical research if 60% of it wasn't being wasted in administrative cuts. So thank you for apparently not paying attention to any of that. And thank God Doge is actually exposing what this money was actually going to. But it doesn't stop there. And this is one of the most important things we're going to talk about this evening. And that has to do with the argument that I always knew was coming. The headlines that we always knew were going to be coming. And this comes from USA Today, right? Quote, took away my hope. Federal workers say Trump mass firings upended their lives. And then it goes down and it says, the termination notice came just before Valentine's Day. I apologize, I'm going to get the last name wrong. Elena Masika's heart was shattered as she broke down crying in front of her 2 children. She has bills to pay, a mortgage, preschool tuition, a car payment, and a scared family. I feel so angry now at the administration because I traumatized my kids, she said. I wish I would have never joined the federal government. Maseko joined the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs last year as a data scientist. She'd been happily employed in the private sector for a consulting firm, but thought a government job seemed more stable. I'm going to promise you right now, you are going to see so many of those popping up in USA Today and MSNBC. You're going to see panels of federal workers. You're going to see panels of federal workers that say, I voted for Trump. I had no idea this is what he would do. My family has been destroyed. We don't know where we're going to live. I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills. You're going to hear this ad nauseum over the next couple of years. Here's the first thing I want to say about this. I know what it's like to not be able to pay my bills. I know what it's like to not be able to pay my bills as an active duty soldier in the 82nd Airborne Division, because quite frankly, I didn't make much. I know what it is to lose a job. I know what it is to lose a job completely unexpectedly. It is incredibly frustrating. As the sole breadwinner for my family, it included a great deal of stress as I wondered how I was going to pay my mortgage, how I was going to take care of my family, how I was going to find another job in a struggling economy. I can sympathize with all of the frustration associated with somebody losing their job. I genuinely can. But here's the thing that needs to be understood, and I don't mean this to be insensitive. It's merely a statement of fact, and a statement of fact that the federal government needs to come to grips with pretty quick. The government is not a jobs program. The government is only supposed to, quote, create jobs insofar as it is serving a legitimate government function as efficiently as possible. And the reason for that is because government jobs, unlike private sector jobs, are not created by consumer demand. They're created by politicians taking your money away from you in the form of taxes and then allocating it toward a particular position. Now, as we do analysis and we figure out that that position doesn't need to exist, or perhaps shouldn't exist, then the best and most fair thing that we can do for the taxpayers that have been compelled by force to subsidize that position is to take that money and either A, give it back to them, or B, reallocate it towards something that actually is a legitimate function of government. I can sympathize with the federal worker that has lost their job, but here's what I will not do. I will not concede that taxpayers need to continue to be fleeced so you can have a job that shouldn't exist. Because it's not as if the job just went away and now there's just one less job in the world. Here's what actually happened. Money that was being wastefully allocated to a job that shouldn't exist can now be reallocated to one that should exist. And what's the best way to determine whether or not a job exists? Well, lo and behold, it's not some politician creating something out of thin air. The best way to determine whether or not a job should exist is whether or not that job is providing a product or a service that customers who can choose to do business with somebody else voluntarily chooses to interact with and exchange their money for that good or service. Those are the sort of jobs that should exist. So every time somebody gets up and says, oh my gosh, Doge is doing a horrible thing because this job is no longer there, I want you to remember that that job was being sustained by fleecing taxpayers who probably could have used that money to buy something that they actually needed. And guess what? When taxpayers are permitted to use their money to buy something that they actually need, not only does that make their life better, guess what it also does? It creates job opportunities within the industries that are actually providing the things we want. Not the things politicians tell us we should want, not little jobs for their buddies that can't get a job with their worthless gender studies degree. No. Products and services that we as consumers, we as customers, we as citizens actually want and voluntarily choose to exchange our dollars for. So I'm sorry. I'm sympathetic to your plight. But you know what I'm also sympathetic to? The plight of people working very, very hard in the private sectors, constantly having their money stolen from them, either through inflationary monetary policy in order to sustain these federal jobs, or through taxation, which they can barely afford. Those are the people I'm primarily concerned with. The federal worker is a distant second. And it's not because I don't believe that there are legitimate functions of the federal government and therefore jobs which should exist within the federal government. But what Doge is doing right now is figuring out just how badly our politicians lied to us. And by the way, for the federal workers that are losing their job, can I tell you the people you should be most furious with? It isn't Doge. It's the politicians that allowed you to believe that these government jobs, which should have never existed, would be there for you in the long run. Every single government job is dependent upon somebody working in the private sector in a job that was created based off of supply and demand, not government edict. And if we're not keeping that in mind, then we're not going to be prepared to make the sort of arguments that we need to when stories like this are plastered all over the news in order to try to generate sympathy. We can have all the sympathy we want. We can help this person find a new job. If this is your neighbor, if this is your family, you can help them if they have issues with respect to paying their mortgage. I would do that for my family, and we can do it for them. But we're no longer going to allow politicians to fleece taxpayers to do it. That's done now. Sorry, not sorry. All right, let's look at the second part of this, because this is the bureaucracy striking back, right? These are the sort of arguments that I've been telling you for weeks now that they were going to make, and now we're starting to see the full fruition come, and it's only going to intensify as Doge digs in. The moment you start to feel some degree of maybe regret or remorse for any of this, I want to remind you what sort of spending was being used in order to justify these positions. Because when we talk about millions of dollars spent for some sort of random DEI program, when we talk about millions of dollars being spent for some sort of ideologically motivated 501c3 to, subsidize trans operas in a foreign country, just remember that taking away that money also means some of those jobs go away. And again, good. They shouldn't have existed in the first place. If the military junta in Burma really wants DEI scholarships, well, then let them allocate the tax dollars of the Burmese people in order to achieve it. All right, let's go into some of the actual funding here. So this first one right here from Department of Government Efficiency over on their X site, $1.9 million of HUD money was just recovered after being misplaced during the Biden administration due to a broken process. These funds were earmarked for the administration of financial services, but were no longer needed. Secretary Turner and Doge worked together to fix the issue and de-obligate the funds, which are now available for other use by the Treasury. This goes back to the initial point I was making. A lot of times whenever a fund is cut or whenever money's reallocated, the narrative that we get is that, oh my gosh, this money just disappeared. It's no longer there for that thing, and so therefore it no longer exists. No, it's no longer being wasted. Therefore, it can now be used for something useful. And that's the sort of things that you get, again, with Doge going through and actually having the access it needs to data to be able to find funds, sometimes that haven't even been spent yet because they've been misallocated. It also blows my mind that Elizabeth Warren sits here and goes, it's not efficient to allow Elon Musk's operatives to mess with systems that send Social Security checks or pay your mom's doctor through Medicare. Liz, I'm going to go ahead and screenshot this. Because when Doge really starts to do its big deep dive into Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, we're going to find so much fraud, waste, and abuse. We're going to find so much inefficiency, not even deliberate in some cases, just based off of pure incompetence This sort of statement right here that Elon Musk shouldn't be allowed anywhere near the various processes that are used to facilitate the fraud, waste, and abuse that is so rampant within these massive government entitlement programs is going to rival that stupid tweet sent out by a senator that said, we can't trust Elon Musk with aviation safety. The dude catches rockets, but you can't trust him with aviation safety? Elon's done a great job right now with respect to identifying misallocation and misappropriation of funds. And what you really don't want, Elizabeth, let's be honest here, Senator, what you really don't want is that level of efficiency exposing the massive cluster that has become allocation of funds through Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. So I just want to point that out, Elizabeth. We'll be back on that. All right, another post from the Doge X page. In the last 48 hours, the Department of Education terminated 70 DEI training grants totaling $373 million. One, trained teachers to engage in ongoing learning and self-reflection to confront their own biases and racism and develop asset-based anti-racist mindsets. This goes in to some of the discussions that we had earlier about critical race theory and how it was working its way into the public school system. And when we claimed it wasn't happening, we went through all 4 steps of the media gaslight. Step 1 is, that's not happening. Step 2 is, why do you care if it's happening? Step 3 is, okay, it's actually happening, but it's a good thing. And step 4 is, if you don't like the thing that is happening, then you're a racist, right? Those are the 4 steps that they use for almost everything. I remember having somebody in a debate tell me that none of this critical theory was working itself into the school system. This was me just trying to divide us along racial lines. Then I showed the receipts, and I pointed out that the sort of people that are trying to divide us along racial lines are the people pushing critical race theory into our school system. And the way that they have done it, especially within high schools or middle schools, has not been to hand out paperwork on critical race theory. It's been to fund grants like this that require your teachers to go through this training so that they can adopt the worldview that critical race theory assigns them, which is largely rooted in this idea that any disparity within society can automatically be chalked up to racism. Ibram X. Kendi essentially said as much. And of course, the only way that they're going to be able to combat that racism is through more government programs, more government control over education. So again, when they cut this $373 million, that doesn't just mean that fewer teachers aren't having to go through this sort of critical theory biased education training. What's also happening is the people that were collecting pretty healthy paychecks to push this garbage are also losing their jobs. That's going to be some of the same people that you see plastered in the media saying, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay my mortgage? Probably by getting a real job. Yeah, one that actually provides goods and services which are demanded in the marketplace, not manufactured by wasteful government spending. Let's look at the next one here. Once again, from the Doge X account, today's contract update. 167 cancellations with savings of $115 million, including a $2.23 million contract for HHS for equity assessments of existing program policies. Let me tell you what that actually means. Let me tell you what that gobbledygook, equity assessments of existing program policies. What that means is they were going to pay somebody, right? They were going to pay some group $2.23 million to be able to look at all of the programs within HHS, to be able to look at the various policies and determine, gosh, how many of these are achieving equity? Now, what is equity? Well, like a textbook definition of equity would be nothing more than a fair and just outcome. But equity within the political vernacular, within the progressive definition, is essentially equality of outcomes. So what this means is that they're going to go through and they're going to look at programs and they're going to look at, gosh, how many additional grants have been done in order to conduct bias training? How many different grants that we have going through these programs which are imposing critical race theory notions of what equity should look like, right? So it's not an unbiased definition of equity. They're going to look at various programs and say, gosh, who have we hired lately? And have we hired people based off of the various racial demographics that we want in order to achieve equality of outcomes? Now, oftentimes what they will come in and say is, no, we don't want equality of outcomes. We just want equality of opportunity because that sounds better. But here's the rub. When you ask them, okay, great, how do you know you've achieved equality of opportunity? Oh, easy. We'll have equality of outcomes. You see what they just did there? Let me just tell you right now, Nobody wants a government agency or a football team or a country to operate based off of equality of outcome. You may want equality before the law. You may want everybody to be able to pursue opportunities, but ultimately there's no such thing as equality of outcome or even equality of opportunity in the real world unless the government is forcing everyone to be worse. You want equality of outcome? Put everyone in jail. There you go. You're all equal. You're miserable, but hey, we achieved equality of outcome. Perfect equity across the board. That's not the sort of society we want. We want a merit-based society where people are able to pursue opportunities in accordance with both their work ethic as well as their capabilities. Let's also add character in there. But instead, what programs like this do is they look at the superficial characteristics of a particular department, determine it's not what they think it should be in the real world, and then manipulate the hiring processes and other procedures within these agencies in order to achieve what they do think should be the equitable outcome. It's not just a bad policy, not to mention it yields really, really bad results when, actual critical circumstances, when the decisions that are being made can be the difference between life and death. You don't want your decisions being made on DEI principles. You want them being made based off of who possesses the appropriate capabilities and character in order to actually perform the task. So cutting all of this and the jobs that were lost as a result of cutting this spending, excellent. Excellent. Let's look at another one here. They said roses are red, violets are blue. Today, Doge and 10 agencies made 586 wasteful contracts bid adieu. Dude, stick to efficiency, man. Rhyming and poetry, not your thing. With a ceiling value of $2.1 billion and $445 million in savings secured, a perfect Valentine's gift for all taxpayers, well earned and deserved. Today's batch includes a $8.2 million USDA contract for environmental compliance services for the implementation of pilot projects developed under the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities. What does that mean? What it means is when you look at the way that various commodities are either produced, transported, traded, etc., they were going to introduce pilot projects, again, under the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities in order to essentially probably reduce the carbon footprint or whatever their climate justice policies they'd come up with. But once again, this is just another way to funnel your tax dollars into various organizations, whether they be bureaucratic organization, grants, etc., in order to achieve their ideological outcomes. But the reality of something like this is your tax dollars are being wasted in order to make the commodities you buy more expensive. That's what the government does with your money half the time, is they make the things that you actually want to do, want to buy, need to buy more expensive with massive bureaucracy and new regulations. All right, let's go to this last one. This is from Lee Zeldin, new head of the EPA. He goes, I just canceled a $50 million Biden-era environmental justice grant, $50 million environmental justice grant to the Climate Justice Alliance, which believes climate justice travels through a free Palestine. If you ever wondering, how is it possible for all of these organizations like the Climate Justice Alliance, or I'll give you an example closer to home. I'm walking off of the floor of the Virginia House of Delegates today, and there's this massive crowd of people protesting Doge, protesting Elon Musk in Capitol Square in Virginia, not DC, in Richmond, Virginia. And we got off the floor at about 1:45 p.m. So I'm standing around looking at all these guys at 1:45, and this was on a Monday. And I'm like, how can they all afford to be here? And then you look at things like a $50 million grant to Climate Justice Alliance, which believes climate justice travels through a free Palestine. And all of a sudden you're like, that's right. The federal government was confiscating the money I earned in order to give it to these people to complain about an organization which is actually exposing how they're getting their money. Makes perfect sense now. These are the things we all need to remember as we carry on and as Doge continues their work. Because there's going to be no end, absolutely no end to the level of fraud, waste, and abuse that is going to be uncovered. But even more important than that, even more important than the things that we might describe as fraud, waste, and abuse, the illegal fraud, waste, and abuse, is going to be the perfectly and completely legal prioritization of left-wing ideological causes over what you were told your money was actually being spent on. Doge has barely been in operation for, 4 weeks? It was doing some work leading up to the inauguration. But it hasn't even begun to get access to the larger departments within the federal government. Why? Because we're just now getting the Senate confirmation hearings. RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, Pete Hegseth, they haven't actually been in office that long. Doge has been primarily focusing on those areas of the federal budget where the president has a great deal of authority to make snap judgments and decisions with respect to how funding is allocated. But pretty soon here, we're going to start to get into the deep dives in the Department of Defense, into the intelligence community, into the Department of Justice. We're going to get into those deep dives, and you are going to watch as members of the intel community, members of the Department of Justice are going to fight back like nothing you've ever seen. For the first time in your life, you're going to see Democrat politicians who are all of a sudden very gung-ho about the military and the Department of Justice. They're all of a sudden not going to be curious at all about the sort of spending that the intelligence community has engaged in. They're not going to be at all concerned about certain things that the State Department has done. Why? Because they actually managed to gain capture of a lot of these organizations at the senior level. I mean, yeah, they were not influencing the E4 in 2nd of the 325 of the 82nd Airborne Division. That guy was probably continuing to carry out their duties as best as they possibly could with a woke senior staff pushing crap down their throats that had nothing to do with them operating their mission. But I guarantee you, when it came to senior officials, policy advisors within these organizations, when it came to the billions of dollars that have been uncovered is going to all of these liberal 501c3s in the form of grants, in the form of subsidies, in the form of special and privileged places with respect to the training of the members of these institutions. That's where you're going to find out that the worst of it were not the mistakes. The worst of it was not even the deliberate corruption, the illegal corruption. The worst of it was the fact that the left used the federal government as their own personal little piggy bank and ideological machine. And it goes way beyond what we would consider to be typical policy implementation. These guys made the chief domestic purpose of the federal government the implementation of woke ideology in every single area they could possibly touch, from your kid's classroom to your movies you watch to the news that you listen to. And if that wasn't bad enough, they decided to make the chief export of the United States of America woke ideology. And they did it not just to further their ideology, but to make sure that all of their little buddies could get very, very lucrative jobs, contracts, grants, all subsidized with your money. So keep that in mind when they roll out people crying on the news, when Elizabeth Warren and Chuck Schumer get onto X with all of their righteous indignation about how people are going to be hurt. You remember that this is what they were using your money for. And when you first brought it up to them, when it first started to be exposed, what was the first thing they said? That's not happening. When somebody says, when you level an accusation and somebody tells you that's not happening, what that indicates to you is two things. One, it indicates to you that this person either doesn't believe something's happening, or maybe I'm mistaken. You think that goes through your mind. The other thing that goes through your mind, and this is very important, is this. The fact that they said that's not happening indicates to you that if it were happening, they also would have a problem with it. Because if you say, I'm really upset about how my money is being wasted, or I'm really upset that this particular program is being financed with my tax dollars and does not serve a legitimate function of government. If they said, well, I disagree, I think it should, that would at least be honest. Now we can have an honest disagreement about what is or is not happening. But when they say that's not happening, they cause you to question yourself, and they indicate that if it were happening, they too would have a problem with it. But then when you present more evidence and they say, well, why do you care if it's happening? Now we're starting to get to it. Now we're starting to get down to the fact that they knew it was happening. They wanted it to happen. And now they're trying to engage in subterfuge. Why do you care? How does it impact you? Finally, it's okay, it's happening. That thing we told you that wasn't happening is happening, but it's a good thing. Well, I got a question. If it was a good thing, why didn't you just say that when I first brought up the accusation? Why didn't you just say that when I first brought the evidence? Why did you say that's not happening? Why did you say, why do you care if it's happening? Why didn't you just say, well, maybe it's happening and that's a good thing? Or you know what? Maybe I don't think it's happening, but I think it should because I think it's a good thing. See, that would have been honest. But then when they've been exposed for the lie, what's the fourth step? Yes, it's going on, and if you don't like it, you're a bigot, you're a racist. Yes, it's going on, but that person lost their job, and so you should feel more bad about that person losing that government job than you should about how your tax dollars were being utilized. It is going to be so important that we remember all of this, not because we lack compassion, but because our compassion and our concern needs to be reoriented to the people that were stolen from and the people that were lied to in order to facilitate this. So that's the thing we need to focus on as they start to present their arguments, as they start to ramp up, as they start to weaponize empathy. Just remember that at the very beginning, they could have said, well, yeah, of course this is happening. That's a good thing. But they didn't. They lied. They distracted. They obfuscated. They gaslighted. And now the chickens are coming home to roost. And what are they doing? Weaponizing empathy. Not this time. Once again, thank you very much for watching Doge Watch. We hope you found all this information very interesting. Please go check us out on Nick J. Freitas on YouTube. Also, we're going to be posting this on X pretty soon here. I'm going to be out of legislative session. We're going to be going up to D.C. We're going to be having some very interesting discussions with members of the legislature, and we're going to start to talk about all the things that Doge is going to need their help with and how we, as the voting public, expect Congress to be able to assist with the very important work that is going forward. So continue to like, subscribe, stick around, give us some feedback, let us know some questions about Doge that maybe you would like us to answer. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Doge Watch.